Okay, so good morning, everybody. Today's actually a very short chapter, relatively speaking. Of course, packed with inspiration and depth, as always. This chapter is very interesting because it's kind of like one perek, which comes after a longer discussion, and it's one perek that comes before like the sort of discussion which will begin to end off this beginning part of this first book of Tanya. So it's like a chapter that's a subject on its own. And this chapter continues discussing, as we've been discussing for most of the chapters in Tanya, the love of Hashem. However, it's going to make us aware of a little bit of a different kind of love of Hashem. It's going to make us aware of a love of Hashem. Well, let's backtrack a drop. All the other loves that we've been discussing up till now, whether it's a natural love, whether it's a love that's produced by your intellect, or the most recent love of Hashem, which we've been discussing, which is natural to the animal soul, it's a reciprocal love, right? All those loves of Hashem, which are needed, right? The emotions are needed in order to fulfill Torah and mitzvahs. The goal of that love is firstly to motivate a person to want to perform Torah and mitzvahs. And besides that, the goal is really to bring Hashem into your life. It's like to make the Torah and mitzvahs a personal relationship with Hashem. And in this way, you're connecting with Hashem. Hashem becomes revealed in your life in this way. And it's good. It feels good. It's good for you. Like many times we tell people, don't you want more godliness in your life? Do a mitzvah, right? It's a way of bringing godliness into your life. And the love is an emotion which has a goal of actually performing the mitzvahs in that way. This chapter is going to tell us about a little bit of a different kind of love, a very interesting kind of love for Hashem, but a type of love which does not come from the desire to have Hashem in your life, does not come from the desire to bring Hashem closer to you, but actually fuels a desire for what we call klois hanefesh. Klois hanefesh is a Hebrew expression translated into English, literally means an expiration of the soul. In other words, this love of Hashem, which we are going to be discussing in this chapter, is a love which motivates a person or makes a person want to leave his body and join on a much higher level with Hashem in order to cleave to Hashem in a very nullified way. In other words, I don't exist anymore. I want to just leave my body, soar to spiritual heights, and unite with Hashem on a level that means I have to die. Because my body right now is not doing me any favors. It's kind of like disturbing my desire to cleave to Hashem. It's putting obstacles in front of me. So I don't want to remain in my body. I would love to unite with Hashem on this level of utter ecstasy. And therefore, I want to leave my body. I have this desire to be nullified, to be one with Hashem. I'm not sure if you're noticing the difference, because beforehand we were saying we want to bring Hashem into our lives. Now we're saying we want to unite with Hashem. And in order to truly unite with Hashem, this kind of love, which we will explain further, makes us think that in order to really unite with Hashem, we have to leave our bodies. Now, Dasan and Aviram, which are the two sons of Aharon HaKohen, they made this mistake. They entered the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and where no one is really allowed to enter, only the Kohen Gadol on the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur, and the Kohen Gadol, when he went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, had a string tied to him that went outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, just in case he mistakenly had the desire that he wants to die and cleave to Hashem, and he faints. And people realized that, there's no movement in there, so they pushed him out with a string. That was the purpose of the string. But Aaron HaKohen's, I'm sorry, Nadav and Avihu, thank you. Aaron HaKohen's sons, they thought that the ideal way to worship God was to expire from this, to leave this world, expire from their bodies, and unite with Hashem. But they were wrong. They were wrong, and therefore they actually truly died as a punishment. But if this is not what Hashem wants, if Hashem wants us to remain in this world, in our bodies, and learn Torah and do mitzvahs, so what's the point of this love? What's the purpose of having such a love, right? So firstly, the previous love of Hashem that we've been speaking about up till now, and all the different types, right? That love is compared to water. Water is calm. It's a calm love. It stems from the attribute of chesed. Much like water comes from above to below, right? You can't throw water up without it coming down. Chesed is something that also comes from above to below. Whereas this love that we are speaking about in this perek is a love that's called ahava kerishpe esh. The love which are like sparks of fire, fiery sparks. Fire goes upwards, whereas water goes downwards, right? And this love stems from the attribute of gevura. It wants to go up, unite with its source. Now, what happens? How does this love actually work? This love works by making your journey in this world, your sojourn in your physical body, it makes it more altruistic. Because let's put it this way, when we love somebody, right? Love is actually an emotion that feels good. It's a little bit selfish. It's pleasurable. It feels good. Being in this body, as much as it can give us lots of challenges and obstacles, and being in this world as well, it can be very pleasurable. We could enjoy ourselves. We could enjoy ourselves a little too much and forget about Hashem. So what happens is that comes along this type of love that we can develop by deep contemplation about the greatness of Hashem and our nothingness. That's how this love comes about. And we develop this love that's like a fiery love that you want to expire from your body, right? But when one makes oneself conscious of the fact that this is not what Hashem wants, this is not the goal, then one returns, so to speak, to the body unwillingly. You say, okay, as much as I love Hashem and I want to be united with him on a level that is pure godliness, but unfortunately, that's not what Hashem wants. So it's not selfish, but I'm going to come back to my body and unwillingly in my body and in this world perform Torah mitzvahs, because that is what Hashem wants. It may not necessarily be what I want right now. And when one contemplates, as I explained previously, one can produce this love by contemplating on the greatness of Hashem, and many, many chapters of Tanya, especially the next part of Tanya, speak about the greatness of Hashem and our nothingness, our smallness, our insignificance. This results in a thirst. It's a love that's like a thirst for Hashem. And that's why in Tehillim we read the words by David HaMelech, Sama l'cha nafshi, my soul thirsts for you. Right? And my soul thirsts for you, Hashem, because my body is obstructing it from wanting to unite with you. This world is obstructing it. Now, interestingly enough, who said these words? David HaMelech, a tzaddik. A tzaddik has completely transformed his animal soul. So why would we say that a tzaddik is thirsting for Hashem? A tzaddik unites with Hashem on a very high level. A tzaddik already has this fiery love, right? But in actual fact, even tzaddikim can thirst for Hashem, for this kind of unity with Hashem, which is called Klois HaNefesh, expiring of the soul. They could desire it. Why? Because before the soul came into your physical body, the soul was united with Hashem very closely. The soul was united with Hashem on a level that was completely subjugated to Hashem. It was in ecstasy. The soul was in a beautiful place, comfortable, having spiritual delights. And then, unfortunately for the soul, had to come into this world. So even a tzaddik being in this world of barrenness, right? We say tzama l'chanafshi be'eres tzia, in a barren world. This world, a barren world, cannot compare to the previous state of the neshama before it came down into the world. Even a tzaddik whose animal soul is completely transformed and is united with Hashem on a level that's different to us. This kind of thirsting for Hashem, this kind of longing, this kind of love which produces this longing, can actually produce what the Alter Rebbe calls over here cholas ahava. A person can become lovesick for Hashem on this level of love. Because a person in this state realizes that Hashem is distant and wants to reach out and bridge that gap, that distance. So therefore, his love are like flames of fire reaching upwards, reaching upwards. Now, however, we know that the goal is to bring ourselves back down, right? Hashem does not want us to expire in this way. The goal is to go up. Now, this chapter explains a concept repeatedly mentioned in Chassidus and Kabbalah, Chassidic literature. It is something called Rotzoi V'shuv. Rotzoi V'shuv is like a movement, going up and coming down, going up and coming down. Now, the previous love that we spoke about, that's more, let's say, a selfish love. It's good. It's good to love Hashem selfishly because that motivates you to do mitzvahs, to learn Torah and do mitzvahs. But all those kinds of previous love is compared to the love of a kohen. Aaron HaKohen, right, the Kohen Gadol, the original Kohen Gadol, was an ish hachesed. He was a kind man. And this, and therefore the love that is compared to the Kohen stems from chesed, which is a love like water. The love that we are discussing in this chapter, this love that makes you want to expire, but then you realize you have to come back. It's a movement of wanting to expire, but coming back down to earth, right? That comes, the root of this comes from the Levium in the Beis HaMikdash. Because what did the Levium do? They played music. And in music, we see that there are different movements. Music goes up, it comes down, it goes higher, it goes lower, right? Music is not one note at all times. There are different movements. And that is why we say that this love is compared to the love of the Levi who sang and played instruments in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, the objective, the goal of this kind of love, remember, this kind of love is a love that makes a person want to expire, to cleave to Hashem. The goal of this kind of love is to return, to realize what Hashem desires. Now, why is it useful? Why is this kind of love useful? Because really you should think, no, that's not the goal. Hashem doesn't want us to go out of our bodies and unite with him in that way, right? Hashem doesn't want us to die. He wants us to stay here. What's the goal? Why is it useful, this kind of love? It's beneficial because when we do come back into our bodies, it remains altruistic. In other words, you're simply in your body right now because Hashem wants you to be. In other words, existence has a higher purpose. It's because Hashem wants you to be here. It says in a sefer of Kabbalah called Sefer Yetzirah, the Alter Rebbe brings it in this parak, V'im ratz libcha shuv le'echad. If your heart runs away with you, return to one. In other words, if you develop a love for Hashem that is a yearning and it's a fiery love and it makes you want to just expire from your body and have what's called Kleis HaNefesh, return to one, meaning one Hashem, return to what Hashem wants. And remember the teaching of our sages that we read in Pirkei, we learn in Pirkei Avos, Va'al karchacha atochai. Against your will, you live. And through living against your will, because the neshama doesn't want to come into this world. The neshama comes into the world against its will. But through coming into this world and through living in this world, while wanting to be on a higher level, while wanting to cleave to Hashem on a higher level, through being in this world, we create a dwelling place for Hashem in the lower worlds. Interestingly enough, in Pirkei Avos, we also say that we die against our will, right? So what is it? What should we desire? Should we desire to die? Should we desire to live, right? You could say you're living against your wills. You really desire to cleave to Hashem. But in the end of our life, we don't want to die. The neshama has a hard time returning back to Hashem. The neshama wants to stay here in this world to fulfill its purpose. So what should we want? So the answer is that it varies. Ratzoi v'shuv. Sometimes you want to be on a very high, lofty level, united with Hashem on that kind of a level, but we can never be content in our condition. So that's why when we're living in this world, we also don't want to be living, but we also don't want to die, because that lack of contentment fuels our altruism, makes us want what Hashem wants. Now, practically speaking, where do we see this in our daily lives, actually? So, Ratzei v'shuv, this concept of Ratzei v'shuv, going up and coming down, is really about inspiration and action. One always has to be sure that when one is inspired, let's say you go to a shiur, or you go to a class, or you read something, or you watch something, and you become, wow, inspired, or you witnessed a miracle, and you become so inspired, right, that you would think that you would be a different person. What happens sometimes that a person remains inspired, but does not translate that inspiration into action? Does not transform the inspiration into action. The inspiration eventually fizzles out, right? Much like a candle. Like the candle eventually will just fizzle out if it doesn't have anything grounding it, like the wax and the oil that grounds it. It rises upwards, wanting to unite with its source, like our neshama, wanting to have such a love of Hashem, like this fire that's going to unite with Hashem, right? So if you become very inspired by something you saw, witnessed, learned, heard, watched, the shuv part is to turn that into action, to make it permanent. It doesn't help just to go to a farbrengen and be inspired, witness a miracle and become inspired. They say that after the 6-Day War, many, many soldiers were very inspired, but not many of them really changed their lives because it didn't translate into action. So that is the point. You can be inspired. You could have a love of Hashem that makes you want to expire out of your body, but you have to bring it back down to earth, because being inspired is not what Hashem wants. Wanting to cleave to Hashem on the level of Kleis HaNefesh is not what Hashem wants. You have to bring it down to earth in a way of shuv to be able to turn it into action, to realize that you're here because Hashem wants you to be here, to transform your life, etc. Not because of your selfish desires to have Hashem in your life. Obviously, this is a very high level of love, but Tanya does take the time to explain how this love of Hashem works. Any questions? It's a pretty short parak.
So we should try to think about it, like this level of love to Hashem?
Of course, everything in Tanya we should try to think about, right? We can't think about everything at all times, which is why it's always good to, learn Tanya before davening. That's when people try and inspire themselves. During davening, one is like a tzaddik, right? Not only like a Beinoni. So you kind of do leave the world a little bit. One can become so inspired, but then we have to bring it back down to earth. Which is why, by the way, Yiddishkeit is not about sitting on a mountain in the Himalayas and becoming inspired. It's not about separating from this world. As desirable and as pleasurable as that may seem to some people. Because it's all about fulfilling Hashem's desires. Does that make sense?
I know it's a little bit different, but what about when the tzaddik says like certain things and Hashem has to fulfill it? Um, it's also it's different than just loving Hashem and wanting to cleave
You're
to
saying,
Hashem.
well, that's the tzaddik's influence on the world. You're saying like tzaddik gozer of Hashem.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's I think that's a different issue really.
it's a different issue. Yeah.
Because Hashem gives that power. That's what Hashem wants as well. Hashem gives that power to tzaddikim. It's not really necessarily a tzaddik always has a love of Hashem. And by the way, we're not meant to be tzaddikim, even though we do learn a lot about tzaddikim in Tanya, just so that we learn from them. But the goal is not to be a tzaddik. The goal is to be a Beinoni. So the Beinoni is like you're still your nefesh habahamis is still active, but you're not. You're so in tune with the will of Hashem that your expressions of your soul are very in alignment with Hashem's will. It's like, the example of music, the Alter brings in this parak, the example, I'll give another example as well of music. Sometimes you could hear like a nigun and you ever heard of the expression of dveikus? A person can become so immersed in the nigun that could feel like he's totally separated from this world. But what's the goal? The goal is not to be separated from the world. Yes, inspired. Yes, know where you would like to be, united with Hashem and on such a lofty level, but we're going to see in the next chapters, which is like the ending of Tanya, that the goal is to be here in this world and do mitzvahs. Interestingly enough, like I mentioned, the Kohen Gadol, that they tied a string on the Kohen Gadol. Specifically, the Rebbe, like when he would say a mimer, he would hold a napkin or hold onto the tablecloth. Just because we saw, like when the Rebbe said a mimer, he would go into a different realm of spirituality. And in order to still remain connected to this world, he held on to something physical. Yes, hi, Sarah.
So when you were describing music, I know that sometimes I hear music and there's like this longing, but then there's this sadness that follows it when you're back in, you know what I mean? Because most of the time that I'm actually listening to music is when I'm preparing for Shabbos or something, and I love that extra energy that I get to put into my cooking. But that level of like really attaching to a song leaves me sad and lacking because I'm not because it's usually some kind of beautiful song that makes me want to be in Israel. And so there's like, is there always like that sadness when you have to come back
longing,
into this?
the expression longing does inherently mean a certain kind of sadness, right? When you long for somebody, you miss somebody, you yearn for something, there is a kind of sadness. And the neshama, in this case, is a little bit sad that it can't unite with Hashem on the level that it wants. It's kind of here in this world against its will. So there is a sadness. But obviously, emotions, especially in Tanya, emotions are not linear, right? So you could feel that sadness that you didn't reach that level that you wanted to reach. You're not where you want to be, whether it's in Eretz Yisrael or united with Hashem, or right. But when you remember that the goal is to do Torah mitzvahs, Tanya has explained this in previous chapters, then you can feel a tremendous joy. Avodas Hashem has to be done with joy. Even the avodah of tshuva, returning, repenting, which many people think has to be this very serious, sad process. Yes, there is a moment of regret and sadness over your past behavior, but then simcha all the way, because it's like a prince returning home to his palace. It's like when you do mitzvahs, that's your way actually of uniting the soul again with Hashem. So you're redeeming your soul. You're not keeping the godly soul stuck, right? Because why is the godly soul yearning? Why is even the tzaddik saying, "Tzama lacha nafshi," my soul is yearning for you, and I'm sad. Yes. Well, when I remind myself that what Hashem wants is for me to do mitzvahs over here, then I'm not stuck. Then my godly soul is now liberated, and that causes happiness. Like imagine if you were yearning for Eretz Yisrael because of that song, and then someone said, "Here's a ticket, go right now. You're going there right now." Or Mashiach came, and we all went right away. Wow, what a happiness! A way of doing that is by doing mitzvahs.
It's funny when you say that, it's like there is this extra energy in me that comes in, and that's when I start dancing and really infusing everything with love for Shabbos, and it is doing a mitzvah at that point, and it is more fueled, as you would say. Yeah,
right. But
it's a good way of
sometimes,
thinking of it.
sometimes this world is hard, and our body creates obstacles for us. So it's like, ugh, who wants to be here? We'd rather be united with Hashem and, without obstacles and whatever. But that's not what Hashem wants. Hashem wants us to elevate ourselves, elevate the world, elevate our bodies. And that's the point of this chapter, is to keep ourselves selfless in order to serve Hashem, not for me, but for Hashem. Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording if anyone